Ethan Carter had always been a man of quiet conviction. A decorated military veteran turned city official, he now enjoyed the simple pleasures of suburban life on his sprawling property, a sanctuary that featured not only a charming, weathered home, but also a serene, private lake. Every early morning, Ethan would set out in his boat, fishing and reflecting on the calm that nature provided. The lake wasn't just water and fish. It was his personal retreat, a slice of freedom that reminded him of the peace he fought to secure for his country and for himself. But tranquility was under siege. Across the manicured lawns of his neighborhood, a new kind of war was brewing, led by none other than Kerren, the self-appointed guardian of community standards. Known around town as Vegan Kerren, she wasn't content with the local organic co-op's latest delivery. She had taken it upon herself to enforce a rigid and often arbitrary HOA code. Kerren's transformation into the HOA president had come with a flair for overreach. From aesthetic violations, like porch light brightness, to an inexplicable edict banning any activity that might disturb the local ecosystem. Even fishing in one's own lake. The first confrontation came on a breezy Saturday morning. As Ethan was preparing his gear for a day of peaceful angling, he found a neatly folded envelope on his doorstep. Inside was a final warning notice, citing a bizarre violation. His lake's natural ambience was being disrupted by what the HOA deemed irresponsible recreational activities. Ethan, whose respect for local law ran as deep as his passion for his property, couldn't believe the audacity. Since when is a peaceful day of fishing a violation, he wondered aloud. Later that morning, as Ethan anchored his boat and cast his line into the still water, the sound of raised voices broke the calm. Kerren, clad in a smart blazer and sporting a pair of oversized sunglasses, arrived with a posse of equally officious board members. With a tone dripping in self-righteous authority, she explained that even a single ripple on the lake's surface could endanger the local flora and fauna, and that her HOA's rules were in place to protect every resident's right to pristine order. Ethan's polite but firm rebuttal, citing local ordinances and property rights, quickly escalated into a tense standoff. Kerren's eyes narrowed as she proclaimed, "The rules apply to everyone, even you, Ethan." Her smug tone and unwavering gaze left no room for negotiation. In that heated moment, the idyllic promise of Ethan's property clashed with an overzealous bureaucracy, setting the stage for an epic and absurd battle between a man who simply wanted to fish and an entitled enforcer of arbitrary rules. As the sun climbed higher, the first seeds of community dissent began to sprout among watching neighbors. They'd seen Ethan's respectful defiance before, and his calm determination in the face of Kerren's bullying hinted at a much larger confrontation looming on the horizon. The very next morning, Ethan awoke to an even grimmer sight. A hefty envelope pinned to his door announcing a $750 fine for disturbing community light and water serenity. Kerren stood outside, arms crossed and a cold, unyielding smile playing on her lips, as if the fine were the ultimate proof of her authority. Within hours, Kerren's rhetoric turned procedural. Official warnings were issued to every homeowner, accompanied by stern legal threats and reminders of the HOA's seemingly unlimited jurisdiction. Ethan, already frustrated, found himself battling not only the fine, but also a barrage of notifications that challenged his right to enjoy his property. Determined to fight back, he immediately set out to research local laws. As a city official himself, he was well aware that the HOA's overreach was illegal. Armed with legal documents and municipal codes, Ethan responded with a formal complaint to the local zoning office. However, Kerren was one step ahead. Before his case could be even reviewed, inspectors started arriving unannounced, combing his property for any hint of violation, even as Ethan's own records clearly indicated that his practices were entirely above board. Kerren's smug declaration, "The rules are absolute, Ethan," echoed in the cool corridors of his once peaceful home. Yet for every inspection, Ethan's evidence of compliance only strengthened. Neighbors, who had long suffered in silence under Kerren's strict regime, began exchanging knowing looks. While Kerren expected blind obedience, Ethan's respectful defiance was starting to inspire skepticism among the community. The fine, the legal threats, and the invasive inspections marked the HOA's first power move. But in every step of this operation, Ethan was silently gathering the pieces of a counterattack. Each official notice was photocopied, every inspector's comment noted, and every encounter recorded. The war was just beginning, and although the HOA was flexing its muscle with all the pomp of a high-handed bureaucracy, Ethan was setting the groundwork for an undeniable legal and moral rebuttal. As the days wore on, a sinister pattern emerged. Ethan began to notice that the same complaints used against him in the morning were whispered about in hushed tones at evening barbecues. Neighbors recounted bizarre fines and suspicious donations to HOA funds that conveniently erased their own infractions. The more Ethan looked into it, the clearer it became. Kerren was exploiting her position, manipulating rules to line her own pockets and impose a reign of terror on the community. One evening, while reviewing a folder of meticulously organized documents, Ethan received a discreet tip from a longtime board member, one whose conscience was clearly pricked by Kerren's overreach. This insider revealed that Kerren had been misappropriating HOA funds for personal luxuries and that many violations were fabricated on a whim. Driven by a sense of justice, Ethan began setting up cameras in areas where Kerren was known to patrol. The footage, grainy at first but steadily improving, would capture every instance of bullying and abuse of power. Each frame built the case for a legal counterstrike, a plan that Ethan knew he had to execute before the HOA's tyranny became permanent. Meanwhile, Kerren was not content with minor fines and bureaucratic intimidation. She started issuing false violation notices not just to Ethan, but to several residents. Threats of eviction and even property seizure were now part of her arsenal. The stakes were raised. Her tactics grew increasingly desperate, and even a few board members began to question whether her methods were truly in the best interest of the community. In hushed meetings and secret emails, Ethan rallied support. Neighbors began coming forward, sharing their own stories of absurd fines and harassment. The community's anger simmered, and whispers of a collective uprising filled the hallways of the HOA office. Though Kerren's public face remained unyielding, the cracks in her carefully constructed empire were beginning to show. Ethan's investigation into the HOA's corruption wasn't just about saving his own rights. It was about restoring dignity and fairness to a community held hostage by one woman's tyrannical obsession. Each piece of evidence he compiled painted a vivid picture of abuse, one where the rules were not meant to protect, but to control. The tipping point came on a chilly autumn morning. Ethan awoke to the horrifying sight of heavy machinery tearing into his driveway. Kerren had claimed that the HOA was expanding sidewalks to improve neighborhood accessibility. In reality, the bulldozers were there to confiscate any semblance of personal freedom, targeting the very heart of Ethan's sanctuary. That afternoon, at the scheduled HOA meeting, Ethan arrived armed with irrefutable legal documents and a file thick with evidence. The meeting room, usually filled with polite small talk, fell into a tense silence as Ethan calmly laid out his case. Every board member's face tightened with discomfort as he recounted the illegal fines, unauthorized inspections, and the questionable use of HOA funds. Despite the mounting evidence, Kerren remained defiant. With an icy stare, she dismissed his claims as misinterpretations of community guidelines. But the community, now awakened to the truth, began murmuring in agreement with Ethan. One by one, neighbors voiced their support and shared similar experiences of harassment. Amid the chaos, Kerren attempted one final public stunt, a fake lawsuit notice threatening to shut down Ethan's utilities if he didn't conform to the HOA's ever-changing standards. The room erupted. What was meant to be a display of power turned into a moment of collective defiance, as community members rallied behind Ethan and denounced the farcical threats. It was at that meeting that Ethan's quiet determination transformed into a full-blown counterattack. With the backing of his neighbors and the weight of undeniable legal evidence, he announced his intention to file a class-action lawsuit against the HOA. The power dynamics had shifted. No longer could Kerren hide behind convoluted regulations and empty threats. Kerren's face turned a shade of crimson as she realized her grip on the community was slipping. Though she tried to maintain control, the seeds of revolution had been sown. The once obedient board members began to murmur doubts, and even those who had once feared her retribution started questioning the legitimacy of her actions. Cornered and desperate, Kerren's tactics grew increasingly extreme. One seemingly ordinary afternoon, as Ethan was enjoying a rare moment of solitude, casting his line into the mirror-like surface of his beloved lake, an unexpected terror shattered the calm. Out of nowhere, a flash and a loud crack echoed across the water. Ethan felt a searing pain as a projectile struck him. Later, horrified neighbors would learn that vegan Kerren had, in a final act of defiance, fired a shot, aimed to intimidate and silence his resistance. The chaos that ensued was instantaneous. Kerren had called in the police, claiming that Ethan's reckless fishing had escalated into a public disturbance. But when officers arrived, they found Ethan, dazed and bleeding from a minor injury, clutching his fishing rod and a camera recording the entire incident. The video evidence, capturing every shocking moment from Kerren's enraged face to the unmistakable sound of the shot, would soon spread like wildfire through social media. In the midst of the uproar, it became clear that Kerren's actions had crossed a line. Not only had she abused her power repeatedly, but now she had physically endangered a resident. The police, already skeptical of her repeated legal threats, began to scrutinize her claims. Meanwhile, Ethan, though in pain, managed to keep his composure. With his badge still tucked away in his pocket and the support of his neighbors echoing in his mind, he calmly explained the situation to the authorities. Kerren's desperation did not end with that incident. Determined to maintain her iron grip over the community, she resorted to hiring a private investigator, an individual whose shady methods soon proved to be another piece of damning evidence against her. When Ethan reviewed the security footage later that day, he caught the PI sneaking around his garage, attempting to plant false evidence. That discovery would become the final nail in Kerren's crumbling case. At the next HOA meeting, with the community already buzzing from the shooting incident, Ethan played the damning footage for everyone. The room filled with gasps and murmurs of disbelief as neighbor after neighbor realized that the woman who claimed to protect them was in fact a tyrant willing to use violence to enforce her absurd rules. In the wake of the shocking shooting and the damning evidence that followed, the community had had enough. Within days, a town hall meeting was convened not by Kerren, but by the homeowners themselves. Fueled by a shared sense of injustice, the residents united to demand accountability. Heated discussions turned into an overwhelming vote of no confidence. In a dramatic turn of events, Kerren was ousted from the HOA board. The city, now alerted by mounting complaints and undeniable video evidence, launched a formal investigation into the HOA's practices. With public support and legal backing, the HOA was slapped with fines for its abusive policies, and Kerren's personal finances took a hit as her misappropriated funds were uncovered. Ethan, once the reluctant target of bureaucratic bullying, now found himself hailed as the community's champion. He continued to work with local officials, ensuring that new regulations would protect property rights rather than infringe upon them. Every step of the way, the evidence Ethan had gathered proved invaluable. His meticulous documentation not only vindicated him, but also exposed a long-standing pattern of corruption that had plagued the HOA for years. As the fallout deepened, even former supporters of Kerren began distancing themselves. Her once impeccable reputation was shattered. The headlines blared stories of abusive power, and her personal life began to unravel. Neighbors no longer feared her dictatorial decrees. Instead, they celebrated their newfound freedom, a community that had taken back control from an entitled despot. With Kerren's authority gone, the HOA's oppressive measures were quickly rescinded. Homeowners were finally able to enjoy their properties in peace. Ethan returned to his beloved lake, this time greeted by supportive waves from neighbors who passed by on their evening strolls. His victory wasn't just personal. It was a triumph for every resident who had ever felt trampled by needless rules and overzealous management. In the aftermath of Kerren's dramatic expulsion, the community's battle shifted from emotional resistance to a full-scale legal showdown. Ethan, now seen as the voice of justice, spearheaded a class action lawsuit that united scores of homeowners. Each resident, armed with their own stories of relentless harassment and arbitrary fines, stepped forward to expose a system that had long thrived on unchecked authority. Courtrooms quickly transformed into battlegrounds where evidence of abuse was laid bare. Testimonies echoed the decades-long history of wrongful fines, fabricated violation notices, and blatant misuse of HOA funds. One by one, homeowners recounted how Kerren's regime had eroded not only their financial stability, but also their peace of mind. Lawyers presented compelling accounts of unauthorized inspections and the subtle coercion that left many feeling powerless. The narrative that emerged was clear. The HOA had operated far beyond its legal mandate. City officials, prompted by the overwhelming public outcry and mounting evidence, took swift action. Investigations were launched that scrutinized every facet of the HOA's operations. Fines were imposed for illegal enforcement practices, and several board members found themselves under the harsh lens of legal inquiry. The scandal reverberated across the region, igniting debates about property rights and the dangerous precedent of unchecked bureaucratic power. Throughout this legal maelstrom, Ethan remained unwavering, determined to ensure that justice prevailed. He meticulously compiled every piece of evidence, from recorded conversations to documents that revealed the financial discrepancies within the HOA. His commitment went beyond personal vindication. It was a crusade for every homeowner who had ever felt intimidated by overreaching authority. As the trial unfolded, it became a symbol of resistance against oppressive systems. The courtroom sessions were marked by dramatic revelations, financial records showing misappropriated funds, internal emails that hinted at collusion, and testimonies that painted a damning portrait of a board willing to sacrifice fairness for control. Each detail not only bolstered the case against the HOA, but also served as a stark reminder of what happens when power is left unchecked. The verdict, when it finally came, was not just a legal judgment, but a profound moment of community redemption. The ruling handed down by the court sent shockwaves through similar organizations across the region. It was a resounding declaration that no group could impose its will at the expense of individual rights, without facing serious legal consequences. The success of the lawsuit did more than just dismantle an abusive regime. It ignited a broader conversation about governance, accountability, and the protection of citizens' freedoms. For Ethan, the victory was bittersweet. While it meant the end of a tyrannical chapter, it also underscored the hard-fought nature of true justice. Every piece of evidence handed over, every testimony recorded, was a testament to the resilience of a community that refused to be bullied. In turning over all the damning evidence to the proper authorities, Ethan ensured that not only would the HOA be held accountable, but that a precedent would be set, a clear message to any future board that the abuse of power would be met with swift and uncompromising legal resistance. In the end, the full legal reckoning of the HOA marked a turning point for the neighborhood. The ruling provided a definitive end to a period marked by fear and arbitrary control, replacing it with a promise of fairness and renewed communal trust. The legal consequences, severe and far-reaching, dismantled the very foundation of the HOA's authority, ensuring that the abuse of power would never again be allowed to flourish unchecked. As the legal hammer fell and the community's verdict echoed throughout the neighborhood, Kerren's once formidable image began to crumble irreversibly. No longer the imperious enforcer of the HOA's arbitrary mandates, she found herself the unwilling center of a public spectacle. Local news outlets picked up on her dramatic reversal, and the headlines painted a picture of a woman who had traded authority for disgrace. Social media buzzed with memes and biting commentary, turning her former reputation into a source of endless ridicule. The financial strain that had been simmering beneath the surface burst into open crisis. Investigations revealed not only the extent of her misappropriations, but also a pattern of personal extravagance that had drained the HOA's coffers. Neighbors recalled with disbelief the many times she had imposed ludicrous fines for minor infractions, a stark contrast to the financial irresponsibility that now defined her. As the evidence mounted, Her support network began to vanish. Former allies distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with someone whose actions had brought so much shame to the community. In the midst of the scandal, personal rumors took on a life of their own. Whispers of marital strife soon evolved into public reports that her husband had filed for divorce. The once meticulously maintained image of Kerren began to show unmistakable cracks. Her car, a symbol of her erstwhile status, was repossessed amid a flurry of financial woes, a final, bitter blow that underscored her fall from grace. The transformation was not just financial or reputational. It was a profound personal collapse. Former colleagues and acquaintances now eyed her with a mixture of pity and derision, unable to reconcile the image of the once powerful HOA queen with the broken figure that now shuffled through community events. Kerren's attempts to cling to her old identity, whether through defensive outbursts or feeble attempts at justification, only deepened the chasm between her past influence and her present reality. Months later, fate delivered one last twist of poetic justice. At a local property management expo, an event that brought together industry professionals and community leaders, Ethan encountered Kerren again. No longer the self-assured leader who once ruled with an iron fist, she was now listed on the program as an assistant property manager for another HOA. The sight of her, trying to salvage some semblance of relevance in a role far beneath her former ambitions, was a stark, silent testimony to her downfall. Ethan couldn't resist a final, wry remark when their eyes met, a subtle yet piercing acknowledgement of her transformation. "I hope you like following the rules," he quipped, a comment that encapsulated the irony of her journey. His words weren't filled with malice, but they carried the weight of justice served. In that brief encounter, the community's collective resolve was reaffirmed. Those who abuse power will ultimately find themselves humbled by the very systems they sought to manipulate. In the aftermath, Kerren's personal and professional collapse served as a cautionary tale for others. Her rapid descent, from a figure of unchecked authority to a symbol of entitlement undone, became a topic of discussion at community gatherings and local meetings. The downfall of vegan Kerren was not just about one individual's loss. It marked the reclamation of power by a community that had long suffered under oppressive management. The story of her rise and fall became a reminder that true leadership is built on fairness, accountability, and respect, a lesson that the neighborhood would not soon forget. Kerren's story, with all its twists and turns, ultimately reinforced the idea that justice and integrity prevail over arrogance and misuse of power. Her personal collapse, public and unyielding, served as both an end and a beginning. The end of an era of overreach and the start of a more balanced, community-focused future. In the quiet that followed the legal battles and public reckonings, the neighborhood began to rediscover its long-lost spirit. No longer ruled by fear or the heavy hand of arbitrary rules, the community blossomed into a space of genuine camaraderie and renewed trust. Ethan's home and his beloved lake, once the epicenters of conflict, transformed into symbols of resilience and liberation. Neighbors who had once whispered in anxiety now laughed together under the open sky, celebrating the return of a life free from oppressive oversight. On a warm summer evening, the air thick with a scent of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass, Ethan found himself sitting on his porch after a lively community barbecue. The evening had been filled with stories of past tribulations and unexpected victories, each tale contributing to the mosaic of their shared triumph. As the chatter gradually subsided into a comfortable silence, a gentle knock at the door broke the stillness. Ethan opened it to find his old friend, a mischievous grin playing on his face, holding an outlandish HOA violation notice. The notice, printed on paper with deliberately exaggerated legalese, accused Ethan of excessive neighborly cheer and the undue spread of communal positivity. A ripple of laughter spread through the group gathered around, each resident savoring the irony of the moment. With a knowing smile and a spark in his eyes, Ethan replied, "They really did try." In that light-hearted exchange lay a powerful message. The mock citation was not a reminder of past struggles, but a celebration of how far the community had come. It was a symbolic closure, A final, resounding mic drop that echoed the sentiment that no one, no matter how high-handed, could stifle the collective spirit of a united people. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, its golden rays bathed the neighborhood in a warm, forgiving glow. The laughter, the shared stories, and even the playful jibes were all threads in a new tapestry of community life, one woven from the determination to stand up against injustice and the courage to reclaim personal freedoms. The era of relentless, overreaching regulation had given way to an environment where every resident had a voice, where unity was cherished, and where the scars of past battles were slowly healing into badges of honor. In that gentle twilight, the legacy of the struggle became clear. When power is misused, collective resilience and truth have the remarkable ability to prevail. Ethan's journey, marked by steadfast determination and the unwavering support of his neighbors, had turned a once bleak narrative into a beacon of hope. The oppressive reign of vegan Kerren was no more, and in its place, a community emerged that was both stronger and more vigilant. As the final notes of the day faded into night, a sense of peace settled over the neighborhood. Their story of defiance, solidarity, and ultimately redemption was now etched into the fabric of their shared history. And with that, the curtain fell on a chapter defined by injustice, leaving behind a powerful reminder. True freedom is a victory that belongs to all.